Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about the Trail of Tears and the effects it had on Indigenous people to this day, including personal experiences. I know that my experiences matter to very few other than myself, as I suspect is true for most people, but I cannot separate my learning and my sharing of that research from my personal thoughts. So as you learn with me, you must also learn about me. Introduction. School taught me little to nothing on this event, or other events for that matter. We barely scratched the surface of the horrors Columbus imposed on natives towards the end of my high school career. I only remember my dad telling me how horrible the Trail of Tears was. Some of my family is Native, and it's important in reference to the history of Indigenous peoples to go down this line of thinking, where we talk about the flaws in this right to claim with that sort of one-drop rule. One-drop rule is a term in reference to Black/African ancestry, but is generally used to differentiate white citizens from all others. All my sources will be included below. That is from The One Drop Rule in America, a Story. There is no specific amount that determines relation to Indigenous identity, though acceptance to tribes is set by their own criteria as they are sovereign nations. A lot of people related far back enough to one tribe or another because so many women and children were taken as workers, slaves, mind you, not just workers, but I'm not sure what words I can and cannot say on here, and I don't want my videos to be taken down because I want this education to be out there. I want it to be accessible for everyone. But that means that the people that were victimized were consequently tied to the people who abused them. Obviously, then, acceptance to a tribe should be determined upon its own people, and usually documented lineage is a determining factor. In a weird way, it reminds me of Logic's lyrics in Everybody. It's like the devil playing spades with the pastor. Granted, there is a lot weird in this song, like how it spreads this misunderstanding of white privilege, but ultimately people do look at you differently when you tell them you're not white or not totally white. They tell you weird, semi-racist, well-meaning stories about this one native person that they knew. However, if they perceive you as white, which will be the majority of the time for white-passing individuals, as you're not typically interacting on a personal level with every single person you run into, there's safety in that. I got to rambling, but the reason it reminds me is because it does feel like two parts of me are fighting inside. The truth is, I don't understand the slightest thing about any of the cultures my ancestry is tied to, and I hardly even understand what white or American culture is that I'm supposed to feel patriotic for. I was raised in a predominantly Hispanic area, and most of my beliefs and traditions were shaped by that. When it starts getting cold, I crave pozole. If you have recipes or suggestions or tips, please share them, because I've not had it in a long time. I'm going a little crazy, and I'm a bad cook, I'm not gonna lie, because, again, my mom is white, or whatever she wants to say she is, I don't know. But she, most of the time, was not the one watching me. I was either taking care of myself, taking care of my siblings, or we'd be over at somebody's house, but that woman could burn water. So I never learned how to cook, and I'm kind of trying to figure it out. So if you have tips, obviously I will be absolutely appreciative. I fell to my knees in devastation every time I hear about another ice raid, especially ones that affect directly my friends and my friends' families, because there's so much with sorry. And I share as much information as I can to keep people educated and informed. I even remember arguing with my grandparents back in middle school about how a lot of my friends are Hispanic and a lot of their families immigrated here, and they're not stealing jobs, they're doing jobs that we don't want to do, or we wouldn't take that sort of pay for. So I don't understand how you could argue they're not even beneficial to the economy, because they pay into taxes, and then most often don't get the least amount of support back from that. They don't get the benefits. So they're literally just affecting the economy positively. No human is illegal, especially not on stolen land. and I try to be the best advocate I can be, but ultimately I feel devastatingly tied to no culture. I feel like I'm wandering aimlessly through life trying to find someone, something to relate to. Oftentimes forced to forget their cultural practices and assimilate, there is some ounce of my heart that says retracing your ancestry and trying to learn in a respectful manner, never taking up spaces of those who have faced the abuse of the state more closely based on the color of their skin, is valid. Learning those of our dying languages, returning to religions. People tend to call anything vaguely philosophical religion, but truthfully anything you believe in can be your religion, I suppose. Whatever helps us get through the day. Giving back to Earth and more seem like a worthy cause. In 2 years, through murder, mutilation, or suicide, half of the 250,000 Indians on Haiti were dead. Zinn, 1980, page 11. This quote is in reference to Columbus. Most of my people are gone, either murdered, missing, or brought up in such a way as to make them forget who they were. Feels as if some part of me must constantly fight just for the right to exist, and my voice is never loud enough even when I scream until my throat is raw. I ache for a community to feel like I belong to. Historical details on the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears involved 60,000 people from the 5 civilized tribes, 16,000 Cherokee, forgive me if I butcher any of these words, Aniyonwia or Kitua, meaning the principal people, first one, and Kitua was the tribe's original name. That's from the source research guides and class pages, Native American and Indigenous Studies, Cherokee 2025. 15,000 Choctaw, though one source states over 20,000, may be referring to total population though. Source is 5 civilized tribes, no date. Over 4,000 Chickasaw, 19,600 Creeks, Muskogee, between 2,833 and 4,000 Seminole removed. Use of the name was from a dialect of the Muskogean people, such as the Creek Simaloni. I might have pronounced that wrong, I apologize. Americans, always weird to say because the real Americans were the natives, but pronounced it Seminole. Seminole history, no date. Between 1830 and 1850, around 8,000 to 12,300 total from all the tribes died, a fifth of all that were removed. Ethnic cleanse, genocide, and death march are all terms used to describe what was done to the people of these tribes, though some argue whether genocide is an appropriate term to use as the tribes retained some bit of sovereignty. Maybe asking a person whose family history ties more closely to the event how they would describe it. I'm sure they are able to paint a more accurate description. Most often referred to as the Trail of Tears for Cherokee, as thousands died, the term originated from descriptions of the Choctaw as a trail of tears and death. Feynman Silva, 1997, page 19. Regarding the Indian Removal Act, which was his top legislative priority, Andrew Jackson said, "It will slow the progress of decay, which is lessening their numbers, and perhaps cause them gradually, under the protection of the government and through the influence of good counsels, to cast off their savage habits and become an interesting, civilized, and Christian community." National Archives, 2021. Meaning, deliberately ignoring the facts that most of the decay seen in these communities was forced upon them by either submission or death. People who learned to tend to the earth and take only what they needed and give back to her, who respected no life above one other and valued opinion regardless of gender, are somehow considered the less civilized than those who unalived, raped, and pillaged for no reason other than conquering the most land and owning the most people. The law required the government to negotiate removal treaties fairly, voluntarily, and peacefully. It did not permit the president or anyone else to coerce native nations into giving up their ancestral lands. However, President Jackson and his government frequently ignored the letter of the law and forced Native Americans to vacate lands they had lived on for generations. History Editors, 2009. Removal of the tribes, Choctaw. First on the list of tribes for removal was the Choctaw. Jackson had not expected them to be so cooperative. The chief of the Choctaw Nation, George W. Harkins, had this to say to the citizens of the United States before their removal: "It is with considerable diffidence that I attempt to address the American people, knowing and feeling sensibly my incompetency, and believing that your highly and well-improved minds would not be well entertained by the address of a Choctaw. But having determined to emigrate west of the Mississippi River this fall, I have thought proper in bidding you farewell to make a few remarks expressive of my views, and the feelings that actuate me on the subject of our removal. We as Choctaws rather chose to suffer and be free than live under the degrading influence of laws which our voice could not be heard in their formation." Harkins 1831. By the way, the definition of diffidence is modesty or shyness resulting from a lack of self-confidence. It devastates me that people even now cannot recognize that there are different types of intelligence. This was a well-written / spoken address to where even almost 200 years it reads and attaches itself firmly in my heart and mind. Chose to suffer and be free, and our voice is not heard in their formation. Generations of suffering continued forced assimilation to where our government is now deporting its nation's first people. Still little voice and influence, but that does not have to be the end. When enough of us agree that things are wrong, it does make a difference, even if one person listens to you, and even if that person is yourself, then your voice matters. When they have convinced you to give up is when they have won. Never stop fighting for the things you believe in. The Seminoles resisted relocation from their longtime homes, and Florida began preparing for war. Due to these wars, however, the Seminole are the only federally recognized tribe that ever relinquished sovereignty or signed a peace treaty with the United States. Creek/Muskogee. The Creeks attempted to keep peace, but Jackson decided the entire tribe had to pay for the crimes of one man. The Creeks ended up fighting a legal battle and were the only nation to get the annulment of a ratified treaty. However, Governor Troup ignored the new treaty and forcibly removed the Creeks. President Adams supposedly attempted to intervene, but fearing civil war, he conceded. Chickasaw. The Chickasaw received financial compensation for their movement. They reached an agreement for the land. They took with them all their assets, personal belongings, livestock, and slaves. Once they moved, they merged with the Choctaw Nation. Kituwa/Cherokee. About 2,000 Kituwa people moved voluntarily to present-day Oklahoma. President Van Buren ordered them to begin forcibly removing the rest of the tribe. There were significant structural changes made to the tribe during the Indian Removal Act. The Kituwa people used to be matrilineal and matrilocal, meaning children belonged to the clan of their mothers and wives held possession of the children and assets. During the 1820s and 1830s, they started adapting to the system, an ideology that treated women as subordinate. The women were originally involved in land transactions up until 1785, but did not get to participate in the Treaty of New Dakota due to the restructuring of gender norms. Not saying that the downfall of a nation begins upon the devaluing of an entire half of its population, but that's exactly what I'm saying. When you put emphasis on the mother and their needs come first, they tend to more often gravitate towards taking care of their partners, their children, and their communities. It's not that men don't ever do that, as compassion tends to be an inherent trait that some people do or do not have, regardless of gender identity. However, it seems that throughout history, often it is the women who are taking care of everybody else's needs, and that's not so bad so long as their needs are met. When emphasis is on the man, it tends to solely revolve around him and his ability to do the tasks that he wants to do, essentially. Obviously, these trends are exacerbated by things like rampant consumerism, devaluing all humans to their basest forms, incubator and slave in modern society, but you get the gist is value all people. The Kituwa filed several lawsuits against the United States in coming years. As they moved, locals murdered several of the tribe members. The Kituwa had to sue the government for $35 a head to bury the murdered people. A volunteer said, "I fought through the Civil War, but Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew." Mooney, 2005, page 124. The systemic removal of any Yunwi people and how that watered down their culture too. My grandma was a Cherokee princess. Mind you, as they forced relocation upon these tribes into Indian territory, they did not separate the entire state of Oklahoma up. There were small, unclaimed parts that they held contests for. These were called land rushes. Being a citizen was not a requirement, and many white settlers had begun to realize that the land was worth something due to improved agricultural techniques. Boomers were those who followed the rules of the competition and waited to rush for the land, and Sooners were those who occupied the land before the competition, as the troops could not collect all of the rule breakers in time. Klein, 2014. The Trail of Tears and systemic changes that the Aniunwi people faced completely changed the entirety of their futures. Thousands died during forced relocation, and the ones that did not saw a restructuring of everything they knew culturally. The removal disconnected the people from their burial sites, spiritual beliefs, and ceremonies. They were forced to adapt to new climates and uproot and restart their lives. And even though you would expect that sovereignty would be respected, the United States constantly disrespected the Aniunwi people's government and school systems. Also, mind you, when I say that though you would expect it to be, it's not that we expect the United States to. We've seen the government do multiple horrible things to multiple different groups of people. I'm saying generally, as a good, well-meaning person, you should expect that people would be respected. Continuing on, children were forced into boarding schools to assimilate and were punished if they spoke their native language, wore traditional clothing, or practiced their own customs. Hemingway, 2022. I worry, though, that for as long as the government has continued to force everyone to follow their rules and punish them regardless of if they followed all the rules, will people ever truly have sovereignty? I mean, think how Christianity or Catholicism or religion, whatever it may be, has been an excuse the entire time for people to do hurtful things and remove themselves from the guilt, so long as they repent before they die. Mind you, interpretations of hell did not even first show up until other influences convinced it to become cultural practice. Jesus was literally just telling everyone to be kind to each other, but some folks needed threat of eternal punishment to act according to what someone taught them, and that then turned into being a blind soldier. And God knows the government is not entirely removed from religion. The people that came here to escape religious persecution sure are quiet about the religious persecution happening to anyone other than them. I keep rambling, but back to the point I was making. White people then who were either 1/256th the native, dramatic effect, typically the percent is 1/16th or 1/32nd, or far enough removed that they feel no spiritual or cultural ties to the tribe, realize they could paint themselves as a victim and dodge any accountability if they told people they belonged to a marginalized group. For some reason, everyone says they have a grandma who was a Cherokee princess. Two things one author noted, and another fact that I will parrot because they speak to me. Number one, blood quantum is political, and it puts distance between you and your cultural heritage. Source: my great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess, 2021. Also, Cherokee people did not have princesses, but people are obsessed with this weird idea of royalty and celebrities to where they likely misinterpreted being a chief's daughter as being a princess. Back to those 2 points. Blood quantum was made up by the United States government to keep the descendants of tribal members from receiving what the government owed them. And if your grandmother was a Cherokee, still in whichever tribe you relate to, then you are Cherokee. Especially as they were originally matrilineal, the government tried to ruin a successful matriarchal society. Shocker. You should remember to value your grandmother, your mother. Impact including, but not solely related to the last section. Relating back, there's this impact where people feel no relation to this culture that they want to tie themselves to for the purposes of seeming to deserve something. Even further, the people that do want to use their voices and feel tied to the culture see those people vaguely related who use it to avoid accountability and feel as if blood quantum is the only important factor in belonging to a community. A culture that was surrounded more truthfully in Jesus' teachings than modern Christian nationalists was continually stripped away from us, while Christianity, the right way, was shoved down our throats. I can get behind dissecting the Bible and trying to understand it with the historical context, but I cannot get behind this continued persecution of a people that were doing everything to try to benefit themselves, their communities, and the world. Today, the impact of all this abuse led to intergenerational trauma. There are systemic disadvantages, health crises, high suicide rates, and missing and murdered Indigenous women. Natives have lower incomes on average, lower homeownership, and twice the level of poverty. That's from the source The Legacy of Injustices Against Native Americans Network Advocates 2024. There are fewer opportunities for employment and education, and even when there is opportunity, the history books lie to us, with lower graduation rates. Native Hope 2023. Treaties guaranteed rights, but tribes still struggle with exercising sovereignty and control over their resources. The list goes on. Closing thoughts. Ultimately, I think that the voices of our communities go unheard because we often struggle to come together and care about each other's causes. When enough of us band together, even when unsupported by other communities, we find that the government is more likely to listen. Even if the government we currently have is the worst, they cannot ignore millions of voices telling them that they want to see things get better for all of us. A select few are controlling and hoarding most of the resources, but it doesn't have to be this way. Look into voices from other countries and see what resources and rights they have. Other countries can afford groceries and rent, many of us cannot. Needing to find several roommates at 30, 40 years old just to get by is ridiculous. The top few want you to believe it is impossible for things to be better than this, but it's not. Stay safe, get some rest, protest, and love your neighbor. I'll keep all my sources in the description and the link to the writing for anyone that would like to read it. Obviously, if you're watching this, you probably prefer to watch it in the background versus reading, but just in case. And then I have some book recommendations. So, relevant book recommendations are, and I'll type these out in the description as well, so that in case if the wording is weird, you can still be able to look it up. Cherokee Removal, The Journal of Reverend Daniel S. Butrick by Daniel S. Butrick. Night of the Cruel Moon, Cherokee Removal, and The Trail of Tears by Stanley Hoig. Voices from the Trail of Tears by Vicki Rozema. Ruin Their Crops on the Ground, The Politics of Food in the United States from the Trail of Tears to School Lunch by Andrea Freeman. Further readings, not directly on topic, but still important to understanding U.S. history and each other, which is always necessary, but especially as current events continually try to convince you that other people working to survive that are a different skin color than you are the ones making it so you cannot afford anything. Newsflash, we have more in common with each other than we do with billionaires, so let's please get it together so that everybody can have access to healthcare, food, shelter, education, etc. Okay, fiction, my TBR for understanding each other. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It's about how Christianity is incompatible with slavery. Diary of an Oxygen Thief by Anonymous, a very dark telling of how hurt people. Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. A girl in a strict religious household comes to terms with her identity as a lesbian. The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James is about why humans are drawn to religion. Then my personal favorites, Fiction for Understanding the Government, 1984 by George Orwell, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments by Margaret Atwood, and one I haven't read yet, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Then my non-fiction TBR for understanding each other is The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby, which is about the church's complicities in aiding racism and is a call to action for today's Christians. The Bible Says So by Dan McClellan, common interpretations of text compared with the original text with historical context. Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates, examining extremist communities and tracing roots of misogyny across so many other groups. And then my personal favorites, nonfiction for understanding the government. The one that I have read already is Fentanyl Inc., How Rogue Chemists Are Creating the Deadliest Wave of the Opioid Epidemic by Ben Westhoff. How the governments failed us and created drug epidemics. And then the rest of these are TBR. Let This Radicalize You, Organizing and the Revolution of Reciprocal Care by Kelly Hayes and Mariam Kaba. Kind of fits into both sections, understanding others through feminism and understanding the government through activism. The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Truer, Reexamining Native History in the United States. Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, How the Government Deliberately Segregated Areas, Understanding the Systems that Have Upheld the Abuse to Specific Types of People. And then Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of a Movement by Angela Davis. Thank you so much for watching. This was a heavy topic, and I'm sure this video will be super extra long, but I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, share this with somebody you think needs to hear this or someone who would enjoy it, and keep learning, keep researching, keep being kind. Bye.